Have you ever looked at your baby's growth chart and thought, wait, 5th percentile? Is that bad? You're not alone. Percentiles can sound like a grade, and when it's not explained well, it can feel like your baby is falling behind. Hi, I'm Dr. Mona Amin, pediatrician mom, and your guide through the messiness and magic of raising humans. Today we're unpacking weight percentiles. We will keep height and length for a different day. What they really mean, when to take a closer look, and when to stop spiraling over percentile charts. Because percentiles are a tool, not a ranking. But without context, they can create anxiety, pressure, and confusion. Let's reset that. A percentile tells you how your child compares to a large group of other children the same age and the same sex. So if your baby is in the 15th percentile for weight, that means 85% of babies weigh more and 15% weigh less. It's not a score, it's just a comparison point. But comparison gets tricky, especially when the curves themselves have limits. The CDC growth curves we use today were developed in 2000, based largely on data from US children, many of whom were formula fed. The World Health Organization curves include more breastfed children and a broader global population. But neither one fully accounts for genetic diversity. They don't adjust for ethnicity, parental size, or cultural feeding differences. As an Indian mom, I know that many Indian children, including mine, tend to be more petite. Not always, but often. My daughter has tracked under the 8th percentile since birth, and my son under the 15th. And both are perfectly healthy. But I've had moments where I've thought, wait, should they be weighing more? That's the danger of growth curves without context. They can make you feel like your child isn't enough or something's wrong when we really care about their trend. One dad once asked me how to get his baby boy to the 100th percentile because it sounded to him like an A+, but that's not how percentiles work. I don't love reporting percentiles because of how many parents perceive it as a grade. I only report it if it's needed for clinical judgment or explanation or unless the parent asks for it. Otherwise, I turn my computer and I show parents the trend. Look how much they've grown since the last visit. This is their curve and they're following it beautifully. Because a single number on a chart doesn't define your child. Growth is an album of pictures, not a snapshot. Let's say your child is on the 5th percentile. That used to be labeled failure to thrive. These days we use terms like growth faltering. But even then, one low number doesn't automatically mean something's wrong. Same with the 99th percentile. Bigger isn't bad. Context is key. What I care most about is the trend. Are they growing steadily along their curve? Are they gaining weight, growing in height, meeting milestones, feeding well? In the first few weeks of life, especially if breastfeeding is being established, weight can fluctuate. That's normal. We look at trajectory, not just the number on the scale. In those early weeks, 0 to 1 month, babies typically gain about 0.5 to 1 ounce per day. That's around 5 to 7 ounces per week. From 1 to 3 months, we aim for about a pound per month, or roughly 20 to 30 grams per day. From 3 to 6 month, growth begins to slow slightly, and babies usually gain about 0.5 to 0.75 pounds a month. From 6 to 12 months, babies often gain about 3 to 5 ounces per week. This is also when we may start to see more variability, especially as solids are introduced. During this stage, I don't focus on percentiles. I focus on how baby is feeding, how alert and active they are, their milestones, and if they're trending on their curve. In the first 6 months overall, babies grow fast, like really, really fast. It's kind of like watching bread rise in the oven. Suddenly, they're just bigger. So if there's a sudden dip in weight percentiles during this phase, I'll look into things like feeding, latch, milk supply, or digestion. After 3 months, we start to expect a steadier pace. Babies should follow their curve with minor fluctuations. And stay tuned because I'll go into what fluctuations mean. When solids start, typically around 6 months, we may see a bump up in weight for some babies, especially if they love solids. But that often levels off again once they start crawling and moving more. Then we hit the toddler years, and dips in percentiles are very common. They get more active, their appetite goes up and down, and that baby chub starts to stretch out as they grow taller. So if your baby was in the 75th percentile at 4 months, and they're at the 25th by age 2, try not to panic. That kind of shift can be a part of healthy development. As always, it's the trend over time that tells us more than any single number. And make sure to stick around for when I'm concerned about fluctuations and what they actually mean. There is no ideal percentile, and I really want you to hear that. Healthy kids come in all sizes, but in our society, there's this quiet pressure to compare percentiles. I still remember before I had my children, I went to a holiday party, and the parents were standing around talking about what percentile their child was on. And I thought to myself, would we do that to ourselves as adults? Sit around and compare our body weight and percentiles. So why are we doing it for our children? What makes this more confusing is how our societal narrative flips as kids get older. Early on, we celebrate chunky babies. Comments like, look at those rolls, or the chubbier the better are everywhere. But by the time the kids hit school age, the cultural ideal quietly shifts, and suddenly, being in a higher percentile becomes something parents worry about or feel judged for. Percentiles don't account for body diversity. They don't reflect genetics, natural body habitus, or family history. Let's talk about what this pressure can look like. If your child is in a higher percentile, you might hear comments like, she's so chunky, we've got to watch that. And even if it's said jokingly, it can stick. That kind of language can start to build body shame really early. Sometimes parents feel like they need to restrict food to keep things under control, but that can backfire. It teaches kids to ignore their hunger cues, sneak food, or feel guilty for eating. Now, on the flip side, if your child is in a lower percentile, there's often this urge to push more food. Even if your baby is clearly full, you might find yourself saying just one more bite, and that can turn feeding into a power struggle. It also sends a subtle message that you're not okay the way you are, and that can make mealtimes really stressful for both you and your child. In both cases, what we say and how we say it really matters. Kids pick up on our tone, our tension, and even our body language around food and weight. Weight is not a moral issue, it's one piece of the puzzle. And when we center around health instead of size, we build trust in food, in body cues, and in ourselves. Now let's return to that term growth faltering. Clinically, growth faltering can be defined by weight for age below the 3rd or 5th percentile on multiple occasions. A fall in weight for age by 2 or more major percentile lines on a growth chart over 3 to 6 months. But the label should never stand alone. A low weight or a shift on the chart is a flag for more questions, not an automatic diagnosis. Some babies, especially those under the 5th percentile, may be flagged, even though they are simply small and healthy, like my daughter. Petite doesn't mean unwell. It means we need to look at context, not just numbers. We look at the whole picture before making decisions. That includes, are they growing consistently along their curve? How's feeding going, whether breast, formula, or solids? Are there any feeding difficulties like poor latch, fatigue during feeding, or swallowing concerns? Any GI symptoms like repetitive diarrhea, vomiting, or watery stools? Are they meeting developmental milestones? What's the family growth pattern like? How were the parents when they were little? A drop in weight percentile can be a sign of something that needs attention, but it doesn't automatically mean there's a problem. Sometimes it's a temporary dip during illness or a growth plateau during a feeding transition. Other times it can uncover something that needs support, like food allergies, GI issues, or metabolic conditions. That's why we ask questions and not just look at numbers. And let's talk briefly about what it means when a baby jumps or drops on the growth curve. Growth percentiles don't always follow a perfect line. Babies can have dips or bumps depending on illness, feeding changes, growth spurts, or sleep regressions. These are often temporary, and many times the baby continues growing well when we look at the big picture. A normal fluctuation might be a slight curve shift or pause in gain during a week of teething or after a new feeding routine. We may see jumps from the 10th to the 15th or even the 20th percentile. But a significant fluctuation, such as crossing 2 major percentile lines, like moving from the 50th to the 85th, or dropping from the 90th to the 50th, gets our attention. Why? Because while not alarming on its own, it gives us a clue to ask more questions. This is especially true if that change happens along with other signs of concerns like feeding challenges or developmental delays. It's important to know that these evaluations happen over time, often 3 to 6 months, and with closer follow-up if needed. If a baby is otherwise well, we typically observe the trend before making the conclusion. But if there's weight loss or illness with other concerning signs, we may act sooner. This is why percentiles can be useful. They're a signal, not a sentence. They help us catch patterns and ensure we're supporting healthy growth from every angle. That's why we track trends and look at the whole picture before acting. Here's when I don't worry. Your baby is following their own curve, even if it's the 3rd or the 97th percentile. Their growth matches family patterns. Hello, genetics. Feeding is going well, whether breast, formula, or solids. They're meeting milestones and engaging with the world. Every baby has their own blueprint. I've seen thriving toddlers in the 2nd percentile and perfectly healthy babies over the 100th percentile. Now here's when I take a closer look. If a baby crosses down or up 2 or more major percentile lines over 3 to 6 months, if there are signs of poor feeding, low energy, GI symptoms like vomiting or watery stools or developmental delays, in these cases, I might schedule more frequent weight check-ins and gather more holistic info like detailed feeding histories, stool patterns, activity level, and parental growth patterns if we have that information. This is where percentiles do serve a purpose. They help us identify unexpected changes, especially at the extreme ends of the curve. If a baby is otherwise well, we monitor trends before making that assumption. But if there's true weight concern or signs of illness, a workup may happen. With lower weight percentiles, I may look into nutrient absorption issues like celiac disease or food intolerances, metabolic or endocrine disorders, feeding dysfunction, including oral motor challenges or fatigue with feeds, especially in infants. With higher weight percentiles, we may explore family history and genetics, dietary habits and bottle feeding patterns if they're bottle feeding, endocrine causes like hypothyroidism, but again, only when symptoms match, not based on chart numbers alone. I also look at other key markers: length, head circumference, feeding behavior, alertness, and overall development. Are they eating with joy, growing in their own rhythm, curious, interactive, alert? That's the stuff that matters, and I always say, the percentile doesn't worry me. The pattern tells the story. Here is how you take all of this and support healthy growth without getting hyper-focused on the chart. Practice responsive feeding. Tune into your baby's hunger and fullness cues during bottle and breastfeeding, and also during solids as they get older. Ditch the pressure. Mealtime should feel safe and not stressful. Use neutral language around food and bodies instead of "you need to eat more to get big." Try "food helps your body stay strong." Focus on the whole child, their energy, mood, sleep, development, not just the scale. And build a joyful relationship with food and movement. That foundation starts now to focus on what our bodies do versus the number on the scale or where they are on the percentile curve. Bottom line, percentiles are a tool, not a diagnosis. If your child is steadily growing, eating well, and meeting milestones, you're on the right track, whether they're on the 5th percentile or the 99th. Let's stop chasing the number and focusing on the child. If this helped reframe the way you think about growth charts, give this video a like and share it with someone else who may need that reassurance. Let me know in the comments, has percentile stress ever tripped you up? I'd love to hear your experience. And don't forget to subscribe for more grounded, compassionate, evidence-based parenting content, and ask any questions you have in the comment section. It's how we can continue to grow on our own curve. See you all next time. Stay well.